And I invite you now to stand as you are able as we hear those ancient words taken from the 17th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And while he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down on the ground, terrified. But Jesus came up and touched them. "Get up," he said, "don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Word of God, word of life. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. I'm going to do something a little bit different today for my sermon. I don't have any notes up here to follow along with. It's going to be kind of an unscripted, almost conversational type sermon. And the problem with this is when I normally do this and go off script, my sermons tend to be a little bit longer than they normally are. But today, to maybe prevent that, I'm going to use the advice of Pastor Casey, who, after a couple of weeks ago, was having a coughing fit while he was giving a sermon. So I went and I got him a cough drop. And when I gave him that cough drop, he said, "Yes, you know, there was once an old pastor who told me that you stick a cough drop in your mouth at the beginning of the sermon, and when the cough drop dissolves, that's when you say amen." But perhaps, unfortunately for you, I searched far and long for long-lasting cough drops this week. I'm going to begin with my sermon title. Why should we listen to Jesus? And I know that's not necessarily our question, those of us who have been in the church. You know, because many of us were raised in the church and we have been Christians for our lives, or others of us have come to the church intentionally. And because this church centers on Jesus, we know that we need and should listen to him. And so this isn't really our question. But this is a question for those outside the church. For those who are not churched or who have never heard of Jesus Christ. They are asking this question. And if we, as Bethany Lutheran Church, are going to fulfill our mission statement, to be, to live as, and then to what? Make disciples. I think we need to be well equipped to handle these questions that others in society throws at you. Would you not agree? And so, like I said, this question that people are asking outsiders, why should we listen to Jesus? This was rammed home to me this week as I was studying for this sermon. And I was watching a lecture by my favorite Christian author and speaker, Timothy Keller. And he told about a college professor who had given her students an assignment. And that assignment was to read Jesus' Sermon on the Mount and then respond to it. Now, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is found in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. And actually, for the last 2 weeks, we have read part of that and preached on it. And Pastor Casey last week in his sermon just did an outstanding job talking about Jesus' teaching and why Jesus taught the things he said and the purpose behind why Jesus said the words he said. Now, these college students did not have the benefit of any sermons like that. They had not been raised in the church. They didn't go to church, so they didn't have any of those filters in place. They were reading Jesus raw and hearing Jesus raw, much like his first hearers would have heard him. And the professor said, I was surprised, but not surprised by the student's response. Now, why did she say that? Well, let me share with you a couple of those responses. One student wrote in and said, I don't like Jesus' Sermon on the Mount at all. Because it seems like he indicates that we have to be perfect. And no one can do that. Another student wrote in and said, these teachings are absurd. I mean, they're absolutely ridiculous. Who in their right mind makes being angry with someone equal to murder? Who would do that? And who would ever think that looking at a woman with lust is the equivalent of adultery? That doesn't make any sense. These teachings are absurd. Why should anyone listen to Jesus? See, there it is. You know, when people look at Jesus' teachings kind of unfiltered, and for the first time, they would think, man, why in the world should I listen to him? So how would we respond? How would we respond to that? And I think first, in order to be able to respond, we need to try to get our heads around why folks would say that. We need to try to understand ourselves why they would think Jesus' teachings are absurd. And so I'd like to do an exercise with you in that regard real quick. I'd like to talk about a few of Jesus' teachings, maybe paraphrase them a little bit, and get you maybe thinking, oh, wait a minute here. Is this what I really believe? I'll take the risk to do that. You up for that? Okay. So let's say one day you are walking down Main Street, enjoying your time window gazing, maybe having a little bit of Clear River ice cream, who knows? And some guy walks right up to you, comes right up to you and gets in your face and says, guess what? I am God. What would you do? Throw your ice cream at him and run or something? You'd probably get away as fast as you can, because we know that anybody who claims to be God is either really close to or is insane. We wouldn't have anything to do with them. And yet Jesus says, I and the Father are one. Do another scenario. Say you're out across the street over there at Market Plots enjoying your day. Someone decides to pick a fight with you. They come running up to you and slap you upside the head. And suddenly you hear a voice from across the park yell out, hey, I saw that. I saw what they did to you. But don't run. Don't fight back. Don't go call the cops. Just stand there and turn your head and let them hit you on the other side again. How many of you would do that? Raise your hand. And yet Jesus says, if someone slaps you on the cheek, turn to them and offer them the other one as well. Make a lot of sense? Here's one more. Just one more. I mean, I could keep going on this for quite a while, but I'll just do one more. I don't want to run out of cough drop. You know that person who hates you? You know that person who just really doesn't like you at all? The one who wishes harm upon you and your family? You know that person who talks down on you and wants the worst for you? You know that person who would stand up and clap if they found out that you died? Love them. Pray for them. And don't just pray that they're changed. No. You pray for God's blessing upon them. You pray that they are showered with abundant blessings in their life. How many of you are ready to do that? Because Jesus says, love your enemies and bless those who persecute you. Can you get your head around it now? Can you get your head around the question now? Why would I listen to this stuff? We wouldn't be the only ones asking that question. And we're not the only ones who have asked that question. The disciples asked that question. They were asking that question as Jesus was leading them up on the hill today in that lesson that we heard about the Transfiguration. See, it's not necessarily apparent from the text that we read just a few moments ago, but when you look back in that chapter in Matthew, you will understand why. Because earlier that week, we are told that Jesus had called his disciples together. And he looked at them and he said, okay, folks, I need to know something. Who do people say that I am? And so the disciples started calling out. Some people think that you are John the Baptist raised from the dead. Others think that you are Elijah, one of the great prophets. Others think that you are simply one of the prophets. And Jesus said, thank you. I appreciate your feedback. Thank you for telling me what other people think about me. But who do you say that I am? Quiet for a little while, but then Simon Peter, kind of the spokesperson of the disciples, gets up and he says, Jesus, Let me tell you who you are. I know who you are. You're the Messiah. You're the one we have waited for centuries. You are the Son of the living God. And Jesus looks at him and says, "Blessed are you, Peter, because flesh and blood didn't give you this knowledge. You didn't learn this in a book. You didn't learn this from a rabbi. You didn't learn this from going to synagogue or anything else like that. My Father in heaven gave you this information." And I'm sure at that moment the disciples were proud. I'm sure Peter's chest just swelled up. And they were like, "Yes, we have the Messiah. This is great. This is awesome because we know what this means." But Jesus throws a curveball at him. And Jesus starts looking at him and said, now let me tell you what this means. And let me tell you what's going to happen. We're going to go to Jerusalem now. And when we get to Jerusalem, I'm going to be betrayed. I'm going to be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes. I am going to be put on trial, beaten. I will be killed. And on the third day, I will rise again. And all the disciples went and say, "What?" Remember my sermon a couple of weeks ago. What are you talking about, Jesus? It's what they would have done. Because that was not what they had been taught. No one in Jewish culture believed that was what the Messiah was going to have happen to them. No one. No one had ever been taught that. No one had ever thought that. This was completely foreign, alien. So, I wonder if we need to keep listening to Jesus. So Peter is the only one with the guts to take Jesus aside. He takes Jesus aside and says, "Now Jesus, we love that you're the Messiah, but let me explain something to you. What you just said, that's not what the Messiah is supposed to do. We all know what the Messiah is supposed to do. The Messiah is supposed to come in and get rid of all of our enemies, and then he's going to cleanse the temple and make our religion pure and holy, and then he is going to make Israel a powerhouse nation and bring world peace. That's what you're supposed to do, Jesus. Stop all this other nonsense." And Jesus turns to Peter and rebukes him in the strongest terms possible. He says, "Get behind me, Satan, because you are setting your mind on earthly things. You are not setting your mind on heavenly things." And everybody went, "Ooh, what do we do now? Should we keep listening to Jesus? He's talking nonsense." 6 days later, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up on the mountain. And when they get up there, Jesus is changed, transformed. The word transfigured is used. He begins to glow. I mean, the light of heaven begins glowing through his body. He begins to radiate the light of heaven. It is so bright that the colors of his garments get blended into complete whiteness. It is an amazing sight. And the disciples are in awe. They become even more awestruck when they see Jesus talking with Moses and Elijah. It's a completely overwhelming experience. And then Peter is kind of spokesman. He gets up and he says something really weird. I mean, we still have no idea why he said what he said. You know, "Jesus, it's good for us to be here. Let's build 3 booths, 3 tabernacles, 3 buildings." The word is a little unclear right there. I was like, what are you talking about? And we don't know if he's going back like to the Exodus when there was the tabernacle and that was God's house. We don't know if he's thinking about starting a new place of worship, a new church congregation. We have no clue. We just know he's spouting off because this experience is completely overwhelming. But before he finishes speaking, something amazing happens. This cloud comes and envelops the mountain, and a voice is heard from it. And the disciples hit the deck. Because they know what this means. This isn't the first time that a cloud has come down on the mountain. You know, back when you heard the first lesson today from the book of Exodus, you heard about the cloud descending on the mountain, God coming down and giving the 10 Commandments. Well, they knew what was going on then. You know, that's fresh in the disciples' mind. And there was a warning back then. And that warning was, if you set foot on the mountain, you will die. And so the disciples were like, we're toast. God's coming down. We can't be in his presence. We're too unholy. We are going to die. But God wasn't there to condemn. God wasn't there to kill. God was there to inform and to inspire. And God spoke. That's all he did. God spoke. This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. Listen to him. You may think that all that stuff that he was teaching was out of whack. You may think it was crazy. You may think it's absurd, but it's not. This is my Son. This is my beloved. Listen to him. He's right. And Jesus touched them. They came up from the ground, and they followed him. They listened to him. Man, wouldn't it be great if we had something like that happen to us? I mean, really, wouldn't it? I mean, wouldn't it be great if, all of a sudden the cross just kind of faded away and all of a sudden we saw a glimpse of heaven. And there's no doubt it was the glory of God being revealed to us, and there's no doubt that it was His voice speaking, and He spoke, this Christianity stuff, it's all true. This stuff that Jesus is teaching is all true. We need to listen. And wouldn't it be great if our fellowship hall was filled with people who were skeptical of Christianity, who didn't know if this was real or not, and who were wondering about Jesus, and all of a sudden this voice from heaven, and this was revealed to him that all of this was true, and all of a sudden they all changed their minds, and they went out and they started saying, yeah, we have seen this stuff, man. It is real. It is true. Man, wouldn't it be great if that happened? But as far as we can tell, these kind of things don't happen as much anymore. So the question is there a place where we can see that glory of God revealed? Is there a place where we can see Jesus radiating the light of heaven, and we can be convicted and convinced so that we can say, yeah, all of that stuff may sound absurd, but it's true. And I think there is. I think there's a place that we can point to. And that place is the cross. Because that's what the Gospel of John tells us. It tells us that Jesus' glory is most fully revealed on the cross. The question is how? And it's this way, because if Jesus is who He says He is, and He did what the Bible says He did, then we have every reason to say, I have a great God to follow and a great person to listen to. How so? Well, if Jesus is who He says He is, if He is God, if He is the God who became flesh and lived among us, if He is the transcendent Holy One who came down to earth to live with us, if He is who He says He is, and then He did what the Bible tells us to do, He did, which means He lived the life that we were supposed to live. He followed all of God's commandments perfectly. He did what we should do, becoming spotless, blameless, completely and totally without sin. If He did that and He took that, and instead of using that for His own glory and His own self-satisfaction and promoting Himself, if He did that, He became spotless and blameless, and then He took our sin upon Himself. He took our brokenness upon Himself. And my brothers and sisters, it's not just about what we do. I mean, it's not just the fact that we're imperfect and we do wrong. It's not that we just sin. It's that we are sinners. He took that on Himself. He became sin who knew no sin, the Bible tells us. And He put that to death. And He traded His righteousness for that. Which means He gave us His righteousness. He gave us His purity. He gave us His spotlessness. He gave us His glory. He gave us His status as beloved children of the Most High God. And did you do anything to have that happen? Really, did you? Did you do anything to make Jesus do this for you? Did you? No, that's why we call it grace. He did all of this through no action of our own. Which means this is something so totally different than any other religion or philosophy teaches. Because every other religion and philosophy basically teaches this. You have to become obedient. You have to be perfect. You have to follow the commands of God. And then God will love you. Every other religion teaches that. Christianity is the only religion that teaches that God has loved you. God has accepted you. God has laid down His life for you. Now follow Him. Which means Christianity. It's either very right or it's very wrong. And my money on it is that it's very right. You know why? Because if it is wrong, and we know if things are wrong, and you build your entire life on something that is wrong, if you build your house on a foundation that is cracked and broken, what's going to happen to that house? What's going to happen to it? It's going to crash. But has Christianity crashed? No, it is growing. It is thriving throughout the Africa and Asia and other places. It is growing tremendously because it has the power of God behind it. It has the glory of God behind it. It does not condemn, but it transforms. And have you seen the transformative power of Christianity at work in the world? Have you? And if you have, and if you've seen the glory of God on the cross, then you have every reason to say, this is why we follow Jesus. This is why we listen to him. Thanks be to God. Amen. We hope you have been blessed by this presentation from Bethany Lutheran Church in Fredericksburg. We invite you to worship with us on Sunday mornings at 8, 10:25, or 10:30 a.m. Please like, share, and subscribe this video so that you can help spread the good news of Jesus Christ.